I never believed that my life would spiral into a nightmare until that fateful autumn. It started with an unsettling feeling. I'd become aware that I was being watched, even when I was alone in my own home. I remember that night vividly, lying in bed, my heart beating like a drum in the silence. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind against the window, amplified my growing dread. It all began so subtly, like a shadow lingering at the edge of my vision. But little did I know that this feeling would soon evolve into the most terrifying chapter of my life. My name is Daniel Harper, and I want you to believe me when I say that sometimes real horror doesn't come from monsters or ghosts, but from the all-too-real betrayals and manipulations of people who hide their true selves behind a mask of normalcy. I never thought that someone I once considered an acquaintance could be capable of such cruelty, until it all began. It started innocently enough. I had moved into a modest, aging apartment on the outskirts of a mid-sized town after a messy divorce that had left me scrambling for a fresh start. My neighbor, Mr. Jacobs, was the first person who seemed too eager to offer help. A retired schoolteacher, he had an air of kindness and practiced the art of small talk too well. His visits, first infrequent and then daily under the pretext of conversation, soon began to feel invasive. I dismissed it as the quirks of an elderly man longing for companionship. One rainy evening, as I was coming home from work, I noticed him standing outside my door, despite our history of cordial yet distant greetings. His eyes were fixated on me, and his smile seemed forced. "Daniel, I didn't expect you back so early," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I hesitated before replying. "Just had to finish up some things at the office." I offered a polite smile, but deep down, the prickling sensation on the back of my neck told me that something was off. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Walking back to my apartment in the dark, the streetlights flickering overhead, I caught the unmistakable impression of eyes watching me from a parked car a few blocks away. I rationalized it as paranoia from my recent divorce and the emotional exhaustion that accompanied it. But the unease had only just begun. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing subtle changes in my routine. My daily commute was often interrupted by a red car that seemed to appear out of nowhere, tailing me persistently. I tried to report it to the local police, but they brushed it off as a case of mistaken identity or paranoia. "Maybe you're just imagining things, Mr. Harper," one officer remarked dismissively. It was then that I realized I was alone in this. I began to mistrust everyone around me, even my own shadow. Late one evening, as I was working on a project in my living room, a knock startled me. I opened the door to find a middle-aged woman holding a battered envelope. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said in a hushed tone, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "This came in the mail for you." I took the envelope, puzzled, and saw that it contained several photographs, images of my apartment, taken discreetly from across the street, and snapshots of me leaving the building at various times. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pictures. The intrusion was invasive, violating every sense of privacy I'd long taken for granted. I confronted Mr. Jacobs about the photographs the next day. "Mr. Jacobs, did you know anything about these?" I asked, holding the envelope out towards him in our shared hallway. His face went pale for a moment before he responded. I don't know anything about that, Daniel." His eyes darted away from mine, and I noticed his hands trembling ever so slightly. His response, though feeble, sowed another seed of doubt in my mind. As the weeks progressed, the relentless surveillance and small intrusions in my life became increasingly bold. I received ominous letters filled with mundane details about my personal life, intimate observations that only someone close could know. At times, I wondered if I was losing my grip on reality, but the evidence was piling up. Every day felt like a tightly choreographed performance meant to wear me down, to make me believe that somehow I had become complicit in my own downfall. One particularly stifling night, my phone rang incessantly, a series of calls from an unknown number that wouldn't stop. Each time I answered, There was nothing more than silence or static on the other end. It was as if someone was letting me know they were there, lurking, waiting. "Who is this?" I demanded in frustration during one call, but no voice answered aside from the unnerving sound of static that eventually faded into silence. With each passing day, I became increasingly isolated. Friends I once trusted started to back away, and I noticed suspicious glances from strangers when I walked down the street. The constant paranoia began to warp my perception of every moment, until I was trapped in a continuous state of alertness. I installed extra locks on my doors, a security camera outside my window, and a small safe in which to store a few mementos of my former life. But these measures, instead of providing comfort, only served to remind me of the danger that lurked in the shadows. One cold December evening, I decided to confront the escalating situation head-on by meeting with a private investigator whom a friend had recommended. Her name was Laura Evans, a sharp, no-nonsense detective with experience in tracking down stalkers. When I met her in a modest cafe near my apartment, she listened intently as I recounted every unnerving detail. "I need to know. Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Laura's eyes narrowed. "Sometimes, Daniel, the person behind these acts is closer than you think," she warned. I dismissed her words as paranoia seated by her line of work, but her caution was ominous. After our meeting, I began to reconsider every interaction in the past few months with a new perspective. I recalled Mr. Jacobs' odd behavior, the mysterious photographs, and the unsettling letters. Doubts gnawed at me until I even started questioning my own memory. A few days later, while rummaging through a drawer in my cluttered desk, I discovered a faded envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter detailing an intimate history of my childhood, secrets I had long buried and believed were known only to me. The handwriting was almost identical to the one on the photograph's envelopes. It was as if someone was meticulously piecing together my life for their own sinister purposes. I was shaken to my core, feeling violated in ways I could neither comprehend nor explain. I took the letter to Laura immediately. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, my voice trembling. "How could someone know all this?" Laura examined the letter with a furrowed brow. "It's possible," she began cautiously, "that you are not the only target here. This might be part of a larger scheme, or maybe someone is using your vulnerabilities to manipulate you." Her words left me reeling. The notion that my personal history was being weaponized against me was more horrifying than any physical threat. The situation rapidly spiraled out of control. I began to suspect everyone around me, friends, neighbors, even casual acquaintances. There were whispered conversations on phone lines after midnight, odd coincidences in my daily routines, and an inexplicable sequence of events that seemed too contrived to be random. I started keeping a detailed journal, recording every shadow, every strange noise, every encounter that left me feeling watched. My once orderly mind was now a battlefield of paranoia and anxiety. One night, while driving home from a late meeting with Laura, I saw a figure standing by the roadside. The person was illuminated briefly by the headlights, and I could see that he was watching me intently. I slowed down, his presence unnerving me further, but when I reached his position, he had vanished, without a trace. I stopped at a nearby diner to gather my thoughts. Over a cup of lukewarm coffee, I recounted the encounter to the waitress, Mrs. Thompson, who listened with a sympathetic yet wary expression. "Some folks around here like to stir up trouble," she offered, but I sensed that she too was hiding something. Then came the second major twist, a revelation that shattered the remnants of what I thought was a familiar world. One late night, as I was leaving Laura's office after another session of my ongoing investigation, I was approached by a man who introduced himself as Robert. He looked disheveled and anxious, and his eyes were filled with a mix of fear and urgency. "Daniel, you need to be careful," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "I know who's behind this." His voice cracked with emotion as he continued. "It's someone you trust, someone who's been in your life all along, playing both sides." Robert's words sent a shock through me. Who could possibly be orchestrating this elaborate ruse? I pressed him for more details. Who is it, Robert? Tell me, please. He hesitated before leaning in closer and lowering his voice even further. It's someone you'd never suspect. This person has been using our trust against us. Someone who knows all your secrets, all your weaknesses, and they're planning something far worse than just surveillance. Before I could ask any more questions, Robert was seized by a vague panic and bolted out of sight into the darkness. That night, my mind churned with possibilities. Could it be that my ex-wife, Karen, was involved? Had she orchestrated some kind of twisted revenge for our painful divorce? I recalled how she had seemed oddly calm and collected when I mentioned these disturbing occurrences. There was an air of detachment in her responses that I had previously attributed to her need to move on. But now, I wasn't so sure. I decided to confront her. Late one evening, I visited Karen at her apartment. The air between us was fraught with tension that neither of us could ignore. Karen, I need to ask you something important, I began, searching her face for any sign of recognition or guilt. Have you noticed anything strange lately? Any odd behavior or messages that might hint you're involved with someone watching me? Her eyes widened slightly, and she paused before responding. Daniel, you know I've never been interested in controlling or hurting you. I have my own life to deal with. Why would I do something like that? Her genuine confusion seemed convincing, but a flicker of doubt still remained in my mind. As the conversation ended, I began to piece things together, scrutinizing every interaction I had over the past months. It was then that I received an anonymous text message urging me to meet at a secluded park at midnight, a place where I could finally get some answers. The text was simple. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, I decided to confront this mystery head-on. I arrived at the park, the night cloaked in heavy mist, and waited in the shadows. I wasn't alone for long. A figure approached quietly, and my heart pounded in anticipation. To my shock, it was Robert again. I'm glad you came, he said softly, as if comforting a frightened child. Listen closely. The person behind all this is not Karen. You think you've been betrayed by those closest to you, but it's someone else entirely. His eyes were filled with urgency as he continued, It's Mr. Jacobs. I stared at him in disbelief. Mr. Jacobs? But he's been nothing but cordial. A friendly neighbor, he insisted, shaking his head. That's what he wants you to believe. He's been playing both sides, manipulating every situation to keep you off balance. He orchestrated the surveillance, the photographs, even those anonymous notes. And there's something far more disturbing. He's part of a network involved in property fraud and extortion schemes that target vulnerable people like yourself. You've been marked because you have money, and he's using this to pressure you. I felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. The friendly, kindly old man I had once pitied now loomed as a sinister puppeteer. But why me? I whispered, struggling to comprehend the betrayal. Robert's voice was heavy with sorrow. Because, Daniel, your divorce left you vulnerable, and you have assets that are ripe for exploitation. He's been covertly siphoning money from his friends and neighbors through small, seemingly innocuous favors, laundering the cash through legitimate fronts. When you moved in, you simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Armed with this new, horrifying revelation, I felt a dangerous mixture of anger and despair. I returned to my apartment and began searching through old documents, emails, anything that could corroborate Robert's claims. What I found were several suspicious transactions that connected Mr. Jacobs to shell companies and bogus real estate deals, a deceit that went back years. I realized I had been a pawn in a much larger game of greed and manipulation, and the personal violation I had suffered paled in comparison to the systemic fraud that had been operating right under our noses. I confronted Mr. Jacobs the next day in the narrow corridor of our apartment complex. Mr. Jacobs, I know what you've been doing, I said, my voice louder than I intended. His polite smile faltered as I produced some of the documents I had gathered, evidence of his financial misdeeds. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. His eyes darted nervously, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I replied, my voice thick with bitterness. "You've been watching me, spying on my every move, and now I know you're running a scam, using my fear and vulnerability to blackmail me into silence." "Why?" His face hardened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of desperation, as if cornered in a life he could no longer control. "You don't understand," he began, but I wasn't interested in his excuses anymore. Before I could press him further, our conversation was interrupted by a loud crash from the building's rear exit. We both turned toward the noise, and in that moment, the gravity of the situation hit me once again. I wasn't the only one ensnared in this twisted web. A shadowy figure was fleeing into the night. When the police arrived shortly afterward, I learned that an accomplice of Mr. Jacobs, a young man involved in the extortion scheme, had been apprehended. He confessed to the surveillance, and even mentioned that Mr. Jacobs had been using the network to target several other residents in the building. The aftermath was a blur. The police investigation revealed the extent of the fraud, and while Mr. Jacobs was detained for questioning, he never fully admitted his guilt, always retreating into silence when pressed. The experience left me deeply scarred. Friends who once stood by me began to withdraw out of fear, and I became increasingly isolated, haunted by the realization that even the people you trust the most might have ulterior motives. The betrayal was not only personal, it was systemic, a grim reminder that behind every kind smile, there might be a cunning manipulator waiting for the right moment to strike. Months have passed since that harrowing winter, but the darkness of those days lingers like a stubborn shadow. I still live in that apartment, the very place that became the stage for my private horror show. Every time I hear footsteps in the hall or see a car idling too close by, I feel a shudder run through me. Even the simple act of opening my front door is fraught with anxiety, as if a threat still lurks just beyond the threshold. In those quiet hours, when the city sleeps, I often find myself reflecting on how ordinary my life once was, and how a slow series of small betrayals can dismantle the foundations of trust and safety. I've tried to rebuild, to reestablish some semblance of normalcy, but the impact is indelible. My nights are plagued by memories of whispered conversations in the dark, of fleeting glimpses of eyes watching from a distance, and of the crushing realization that the monster in my life was not an abstract idea, but a very real, very human being. One chilly evening, while I was scanning through old emails trying to piece together another fragment of the puzzle, I noticed something unsettling on my screen. A single email from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth," and the message was brief, cryptic, and left me with a chilling sense of unfinished business. I stared at the screen in disbelief, the signature R sending shivers down my spine. Had Robert been sending these messages, even after his last, fearful visit at the park? Or was it yet another stratagem by Mr. Jacobs, or someone else entirely within that shadowy network? The nagging doubt that not all pieces of the puzzle had been revealed continued to haunt me. I've started therapy, not only to cope with the trauma, but also to try and untangle the deep-seated distrust that now defines my interactions with the world. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, encourages me to see that while the external threats might be diminishing, the emotional residue is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Trauma like this changes you, Daniel, she told me gently during one session. It makes you more aware. Yes, but sometimes it also makes you too cautious, too afraid to connect. It's okay to be scared. It's normal. But don't let that fear rule you forever. Even now, I'm cautious. I double-check every lock, avoid going out late, and I rarely answer the phone without checking caller ID. I've learned that safety is an illusion, a thin veneer that can be shattered by a single moment of calculated malice. The scars left by my ordeal are not visible to the naked eye, but they are etched into my very core, a constant reminder that the people we let into our lives can sometimes be the very ones who harm us the most. As I sit here tonight, writing this confession with trembling hands, I still don't know the full extent of what Mr. Jacobs and his network were capable of. I do know that the damage is lasting, that I will forever be marked by the betrayal and manipulation of someone I once trusted. My hope is that by sharing my story, I can warn others to heed the subtle signs of danger. when an act of kindness masks sinister intent, or when the friendly neighbor might be a predator in disguise. If nothing else, my story stands as a testament to the terror that lurks in everyday life. There is no dramatic supernatural entity, no ancient curse, only the cold, unyielding reality that sometimes the most ordinary people can be capable of extraordinary evil. And as I close this confession, the uneasy truth remains. While the immediate threat may have dissipated, the shadow of that horror will continue to follow me, a ghost of my past that can never be completely exorcised. I don't know if I'll ever fully reclaim the peace I once took for granted. But I do know that the true horror isn't in the fear itself. It's in the betrayal, in the realization that the danger was never out there in the world, but nestled in the hearts of those I once called neighbors, friends, and even family. And that truth, as bitter as it may be, is a secret I will carry for the rest of my life. May this serve as both a warning and a confession, a record of the time when my life turned dark, and of how real horror can be found in the most unsuspecting corners of our everyday existence.